It was important. It's such a like. Like.
Why?
Order. This.
Just the 3 moments. 9 moments.
Go. Exactly. Like I'm.
Yeah.
So.
If you are associated with Minnesota Peace Building, could you please just raise your hand? See, Minnesota Peace Building, Julie as well, there's a couple people back there. Someone, Cynthia, there's, people are just looking for who you are, thank you.
Say their name and try to find it. Possible, like. Think about it. Okay.
Okay, Zoomers, we're gonna start in about 2 minutes. So you have to, this one you can hold like here. I can't really clip it because I already did it, but it needs to be like here-ish. And then the other one.
You're the girls.
Well, yeah, just, it's not like this. I'm sorry, I can't.
So
Yeah, like, it doesn't have to be on your girl. Just
oh,
here-ish.
oh,
Yeah, yeah. And then the other one.
like in the, okay.
I think I'd like to start on time and be done on time.
Such an area.
It's really interesting because in my personal life, I am late. But in my professional life, I'm like, no,
I know.
we're done when we're done.
I know.
Not late.
Okay.
It's on.
Testing.
You have to really put it close.
Testing. Testing.
There you go. That works. Should be quiet or you need to get the speaker off?
Oh, I'll get them to be quiet.
But even if they, the enforcement.
Hello? All right. Just an announcement for Jane. If you have not filled out one of those cards, please pick one of, 3 of them. She has 3 of them up, and she is happy to collect them. Raise your hand, or at the break, Jane will provide them to you.
Dan, are you going to pass them out now? Do you want to just put them on the table in the other room? We'll put them on the table in the room just there, next door. They'll be on the table.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. You all look so beautiful this morning. And for our mindfulness moment, we're going to do some mindfulness movement. Okay? So I invite you to stand up, and if you prefer to stay seated, that's quite right. There's no right or wrong here. And then, first of all, we're going to just start with some bouncing. Swing your arms slightly. I have two mics, so I can't really do that right now, and just bounce at your own vibration. And what we're doing is we're just moving that energy around, moving any stuck energy. Swing your arms slightly, front to back, just slightly. And now bring your arms up over your head and let your hands dangle. Just dangle your hands. Keep bouncing. Get that energy moving around. All right. Just breathe normally for now, but we're going to take 3 breaths together. So we're all in alignment. All right. And we're going to breathe in through the nose, and then we're going to exhale the sigh. Okay. Let's do that again. And as we do that, we're breathing in fresh energy, and we're exhaling all that no longer serves us. So let's do it one more time together. Breathe in. Then bring your arms down and swing them side to side. Just side to side. Let it dangle. Let's shift the energies. And as we do this, our body is happy on the inside. And when it's happy on the inside, the mirror reflection on the outside. So let's just do a little bouncing as we swing side to side. All right. Now return to center. Be still. Not yet. Now, I invite you to roll your shoulders back 3 times. 1, 2, 3. And forward 3 times. 1, 2, 3. Now, I invite you to just close your eyes for just a quick second and just notice how your body feels, how the energy feels running through your body. Just be present with your body in this. You should feel some shifting. Hopefully it's feeling good to you. All right, I invite you to open your eyes, and together we're going to take one last deep cleansing breath, and we're going to breathe in through the nose and out with the ah. Ready? Ah. All right, shake it off. Thank you. Now we're nice and invigorated for our next guest speaker. Thank you all. Oh.
Yeah, well, we can just.
Yeah.
I'd speak.
Understood.
I'll just stick it there. Well, good morning. You all couldn't see yourselves, but Dr. Williams and I could see you. I want to say you all would make very excellent floppy-armed car wash men. Yes. First of all, I want to acknowledge that I feel your anxiety in this moment. Before you and in front of you are 2 incredibly handsome, well-dressed, bald men. And I know the questions you're asking, oh my God, how am I going to tell them apart? So make it simple. I'm Jim Bear Jacobs, and I am wearing a tie. This is Dr. Williams. He is sans tie today. I want you to know, Miss Roslyn came up to me today and she said, you look so good in your black suit. Miss Roslyn, this is 100% because I am sharing the microphone with that man, okay? Over the years of our friendship, I got tired of being upstaged fashion-wise by this guy here. My name is Jim Bear Jacobs. I am from the Turtle Clan, and I'm a citizen of the Stockbridge-Munsee Band of Mohican Indians, which is a Native American tribe that is presently located about 256 miles straight east from where we are right now, in central Wisconsin. I was born, raised, and lived almost my entire life in and around the Twin Cities, primarily St. Paul. In fact, you all heard a little bit about the beauty and wonder of the Rondo neighborhood, of which this land was a part of that neighborhood. Unfortunately, what was left out of that presentation, and perhaps the most notable event to happen in that neighborhood, is that I was born. Not too far from here, just up University Avenue at Midway Hospital. It's no longer a hospital because once I was born, they're like, well, we're not going to improve on that. So, but I do want to say it's an honor to be with you today. And more importantly, it is an honor to share space with my good friend, Dr. Yohuru Williams. We had our paths cross how many years ago now? Well, probably 4 or 5 years ago now, 5 years ago now, and just instantly felt a kinship, and this has flowered into a professional relationship, but also a very, very much needed personal and deep friendship. Now, the work that Dr. Williams and I endeavor, both individually and together, I am sure, given who is in the room, hopefully all of you have sat in presentations with an African American presenter. Hopefully most of you have sat in presentations with a Native American presenter. But I'm willing to bet that in terms of presentations where an African American and a Native American are co-presenting together, that those of you who have been able to experience something like that, the numbers start to go very low. And that is unfortunate. And it is unfortunate, but it is also intentional. That is a design by the colonizer. And one of the things I am so pleased to have this man as a friend and colleague is that we both do recognize just how utterly ridiculous it is that we remain in our silos and really advantage no one other than the colonizer. For me personally, I recognize the need for this kind of intersectional work. And I know that word intersectional is, I mean, it's overused that it's almost meaningless now. But I think if we get down to really the heart of intersectional work, there is something truly beautiful here. I think that this is important. I think that this relationship is important for the work of racial justice, and perhaps this relationship is more important than any other cross-racial, cross-ethnic relationship. And please don't take what I just said and go down a wrong rabbit trail, right? A diversity of relationships across all races, spectrums, gender identities, sexual identities, all so incredibly important. But I think foundationally, when we look at this type of relationship, you see, it is for the Native American and for the African American. Those are the only two groups in our nation for which entrance into a white supremacist system was never an option. And we do this work not to minimize or ignore the fact that there is racism. There's anti-Asian American racism. There's anti Latino, Latine. I mean, honestly, whatever color you are, someone hates you. Okay. And all of that is important. All of that felt trauma is valid and important. But at some point, unless you're Native or unless you're a Black American descended from slavery, at some point, your ancestors saw a system of white supremacy and chose to be part of it. It is for the American Indian and the African American, the only two populations in our country for which entrance into a supremacist system, at some point, ancestral lineage, not a choice. And it's very fitting that you are here in the Twin Cities because the Twin Cities has a beautifully rich history of anti-racism work from both of our communities. Okay? Minneapolis and St. Paul were very early entrants, if you will, into the Black civil rights movements. Pretty much all of the powerful forebears of this work found a reason to come into Minneapolis or St. Dr. King, Jesse Jackson, all of these people that we herald found a reason to come to St. Paul. It is also right here in the Twin Cities that it is the birthplace of the American Indian resistance movement. The American Indian movement was started right on Franklin Avenue in Minneapolis. This is a group of anti-racist indigenous activists following the models of like the Black Panthers and SNCC, started right here. And that work has carried on for decades, but it's carried on for decades in silos. And so Black community has made demands, made progress, won victories. We applaud all of that. Likewise, the American Indians made demands, won victories, and applaud all of that. But that kind of model only serves the colonizer because it tells us the narrative that we should be in competition with each other. That the fact that if Dr. Williams and his community wins victories, it means that me and my community lose. And the way I describe it, see, I'm a trained preacher, so I use a lot of churchy language. The way I describe it is that we're fighting for crumbs that fall from the master's table. And I'm tired of fighting for crumbs. Because what that type of model, what that narrative doesn't tell us is that we built the damn table. We planted the grain. We harvested the wheat. We mixed it into dough. We made the bread. We baked the bread. It's our, can we swear? It's our fucking bread. And I am not content in any way, shape, or form to continue to fight for crumbs that may fall from the master's table. Every time Dr. Williams makes a significant accomplishment, or any time African American community makes any kind of strides, I am here to applaud, stand in solidarity with that. And likewise, I know, I mean, you're all in for a real treat because Dr. Williams, I mean, I can't speak highly enough of this man. Such a preeminent historian, philosopher. And it has been my joy over these 5 years to know every time I have need or my community needs highlighting and uplifting, he's there. I mean, it's even funny sometimes. I've gone to presentations of his just as a guest, as an observer, and he's flipping through his slides, and behold, my picture pops up, and I'm like, what the hell am I doing there? But I would encourage you, find these kinds of relationships because it is life-giving, absolutely life-giving. I told Dr. Williams that I would only take a couple minutes here on the front end, so I'm going to turn it over. But you are, hopefully you're all in for a treat today. This is a work that both Dr. Williams and I very much love. And so when I got the invitation and they're like, oh, we're thinking of inviting Dr. Williams, I'm like, well, I'm in. And when they called him and they were like, oh, we got Jim Bear Jacobs, and he's like, well, then I'm in. So.
Thanks for those. I'm gonna do that, oh my God, that whole technique. So Jim Bear is right. This relationship has been profound for me in a way that's significant because when he and I met for the first time, I was actually on the St. Paul Reparations Committee. So our city council came together and said, hey, there should be reparations for African Americans, given the historic Rondo circumstances, and we should talk about Fort Snelling, and we should go through that process. And it struck me in the midst of that work, as we were talking about reparations for African Americans, this old lingering wound manifested itself, reparations on stolen land. So the irony is that we may have built and tilled the soil and done the things, but the reality is that we did it on land that was stolen. So when we talk about this, it's not just the table, it's the room that the table sits in, right? Right. Materials that built the table and all those big questions that by definition would mean we need to be in conversation to talk about real equity and justice. It couldn't begin with just talking about my circumstances because my circumstances begin with the colonizer who not only bought this group of people over and enslaved them, but did so as it was taking possession of what wasn't theirs and creating a system of laws and rules and customs and values, which they violate in the most egregious ways. Ha ha. Ha ha. See, we think about it this way. The great James Baldwin was famous for saying the world is according to the way people see it. And if you can alter even by a millimeter the way people look at reality, then you can change it. What I hope Jim Bear and I can do in the roughly 45 minutes we have together today is alter the way that you're thinking about this moment. Because I'm going to let you in on a little secret, and we witnessed it here 2 weeks ago. The problem with Americans is what William Dean Howells outlined to Edith Wharton when she was embarking on her literary career back in the 1920s. And what Howells said to Edith Wharton is this: you want to be successful in this business, Edith, understand one thing, American people. Americans love a tragedy, a happy ending. We want everything wrapped up in 30 minutes or less with commercials. And at the end of the day, we want a narrative that says women didn't have the right to vote. And then they got the right to vote and everything's equal now, right? And if that were the case, why are we still talking about the need for equal rights amendment for women and unfair compensation and so on? We wouldn't have needed a Me Too movement if that had been sufficient to achieve what you said, or you said that legislation accomplished. Very true of African Americans, because the irony is, right? Well, the Emancipation Proclamation ended slavery. Well, then if that's true, why do we need a 13th Amendment in 1865, a 14th Amendment in 1868, a 15th Amendment in 1870, a Civil Rights Act of 1866, a Civil Rights Act of 1875, a Force Act of 1870, a Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871? Can I stop now? Oh, well, let me keep going. Why would I need a Civil Rights Act of 1964, a Voting Rights Act of 1965? I forgot the Civil Rights Act of 1957. I could spend all day sharing legislation that has not achieved the course of equity in our country because Americans love the tragedy with a happy ending. When George Floyd was murdered in our community, Mayor Fry came out and said after Derek Chauvin was convicted, George Floyd came to Minneapolis to better his life, but ultimately his life will have bettered, or his loss will have bettered our community. Our community joined in a consensus that he should still be here and the guilty officer, but you didn't talk about your police force. That's broken. And it's broken because it was built on white supremacy. And that white supremacy was about policing Black and brown bodies. Don't want to talk about it in ways that say that, and we're going to get to this in just a second, it's very important. The Minneapolis police were formed in 1867. Their foundation is on policing Native and Black bodies. Black people that were coming to Minneapolis for the first time, right? You're going to hear about the story of Robert Hickman. We're going to share that. They arrived in 1863, right? And then you're going to hear about what happened with the Dakota War and what was happening here in terms of policing Native and Black bodies. So my argument would be that the Minneapolis police are performing exactly as they were designed. Like a lot of institutions, you think I'm playing, but Jim Bear told you about the American Indian movement. Be clear that in 1975, the first time that the Minnesota Department of Human Rights had hearings on police brutality in this community, Arthur Cunningham, the head of the NAACP in Minneapolis, made national headlines for declaring that the Minneapolis police have declared war on Blacks and Indians. You know what people leave out? Indians. Read the consent decree, friends, from Minneapolis, right? The work that the Minnesota Department of Human Rights has done on policing. Everybody talks about the Black. What they forget is if you get in there, what you discover is page after page, it talks about the violence and discriminatory practice toward Native peoples. So our struggles have always been linked. So you've got two impulses here that interrupt the work. First, desire for tragedy with a happy ending. When do we get to the good part? When do we get to the part where we say, mission accomplished? Right? We had a dream. Right? We accomplished it. Because we love that crap. We love that crap so much, we're satisfied with a land acknowledgement as opposed to a give back. We love that crap so much, we're happy with an idea of a Justice for George Floyd and Policing Act. Whether we ever get one or not, we're happy with a 14th Amendment, right? Which we're not, well, look, I'm not even gonna go there, I don't have time. Dr. King said, shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. This is part of the problem. Because the people of goodwill are the ones who get together with half-baked solutions and think they're doing the work. Because we all got together and sang Kumbaya, right? Oh, no. See, Jim Bear was nice. I don't have to be nice. I'm with Jim Bear today. I'm not wearing a tie. There's no reason for me to be nice. I want to say this too, because when Dr. King puts it that way, people get very uncomfortable with Malcolm X, but I want to, because it's Malcolm X's 100th birthday. So the irony is that in February, as people were talking about the upcoming George Floyd memorial in 5 years, I was like, well, look, Malcolm's story is George's story, so we can go back 100 years to talk about the 5 years, but the reality is we'll still be talking about this in 25 years because people don't want to do the work. They don't want to dig up the soil. They don't want to be uncomfortable. They don't want to stay in for not the happy ending, but the hard work. Because you know what America will do is it will resort to the status quo ante, which is why there's so much support for Trumpism and anti-immigration and taking back the 14th Amendment. This is the foundation of America. This is exactly who we are. But people don't want to hear that. They want to talk about dreams. They want to talk about aspirational language. They want to read the preamble. That's aspirational language. We the people in order to form a more perfect union. Bring that up in court and see where it gets you. You better be talking about Article 1, Section 4, or Article 1, Section 8, or Section 9 of the Penal Code, but don't come with that aspirational language thinking you're doing something, right? It might inspire the faithful, but until you change the law, I'm going to go back. Malcolm said in the Ballad of the Bullet speech, you see, the other problem with Americans is they don't read the whole thing. See, in a couple of weeks, or next week, we're going to celebrate Juneteenth. Juneteenth, a great example. People are like, Juneteenth, that's when the slaves were emancipated. Now, every year I make people, I'm going to say it, Jim Bear gave me permission to curse. I'm going to piss some of you off. Every year I go to these Juneteenth celebrations and I'm saying, how many of you ever read Field Order Number 3? Got one person in the room. Most people have never read it. Read it, and what you realize is that is not an emancipatory moment. Field Order Number 3 does emancipate the slaves and says Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation now applies in Texas. What I have to remind people of is 3 things. Number 1, the Union Army is what backed up the Emancipation Proclamation. That's why Texas, it's not like Lincoln issued it and the Southern states, Confederate states said, oh, well, got to give up our property. No, the Union Army had to show up and enforce that. That's why Galveston is the last out. The reality is Emancipation Day in D.C. is April. Emancipation Day in Virginia is in March because it's all dependent on the Union Army. So Juneteenth is arbitrary as a day of celebrating emancipation. Depending on where you are in the country, Emancipation Day looks different. Number 2, if you read Field Order Number 3, Gordon Granger says to the formerly enslaved, and now your relationship will be that of hired employer and employee. So you have now remanded me to the custody of the person that held me in human bondage. How does this change? And it says, and do not show up at the military site looking for support from us because you will not be supporting your idleness. So it reinforces the very stereotypes about Blackness in Field Order Number 3, which we now turn into a national holiday. And I got people running around talking about Juneteenth at Target, Juneteenth at Walmart, Juneteenth. Follow me here. What Malcolm said is, well, I'm one who doesn't believe in deluding myself. I'm not going to sit at your table and watch you eat. It makes people uncomfortable, but Jim Bear said it. With nothing on my plate and call myself a diner. Sitting at the table doesn't make you a diner unless you eat some of what's on that table. But here in America, being here in America, ooh, timely. Being here in America doesn't make you an American. Being born in America doesn't make you an American. Because see, the people think assault on the 14th Amendment of birthright citizenship is about immigrants. That's about Native people. Because when my man Jim Bear says, I'm a citizen of the, follow me here? Let me try that a couple weeks. See how that goes when they go, well, the Supreme Court has now cleared the way for removing birthright citizenship. So all you Black and brown folks, you know where it's going to start with the indigenous folks, because then I can dispossess you of your people. This is the problem. Oh, that's an immigrant issue. No, my friends. You wouldn't have had citizenship to begin with had not been a struggle for Black equality. Other day I got in trouble because so I hang out with him. Dr. Williams, can you come on and talk about the immigration situation? I said, I'd be happy to. I want to talk about the Statue of Liberty. They thought I was going to give us a tour, you're poor and you're tired and all that. No, my friends. The Statue of Liberty is given to the United States to honor emancipation. The shackles on the wrist initially, and then they move to the feet and they get hidden because by the time it got here in 1886, already taken rights away from Black folks. You're at that point 10 years from Plessy versus Ferguson. Follow me here? From separate but equal being the law of the land. So at that point, they just change the statue around. So people go and they see the shackles on their feet. Today, they don't realize the whole immigration debate was bound up in emancipation, which is bound up in the exclusion and thievery of Native people's land and lives. And the history matters. I'm going to turn this back over to Jim Bear, but I want to go to Dr. King because he's worked on, just published this book, Jonathan I. King of Life. I bought a couple of copies in case anybody wants one. But the problem with Martin Luther King is people don't read the whole damn thing. Again, get to the dream part, right? Every year I go to Black History Month presentations and some little girl with her head wrapped up too tight gets up and she's like, I'm Rosa Parks, my feet is tight. Rosa Parks was 42 damn years old. Rosa Parks wasn't old. Rosa Parks was an activist. Read Jean Theo Harris's book on Rosa Parks. She'd been to the Highland Freedom School. This beat crazy. She was just old and tired that day, and she tired again. Oh, they planned that. Deliberate. In conversation and community at a table. They probably look something. Follow me here. If you read the whole thing, King begins the I Have a Dream speech by saying, we're here because it's the 100th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation, and y'all gave us a blank check. See, people don't read the whole damn thing. They get to read the part about freedom ringing from the heightening Alleghenies. Pretty, but read the whole thing. In a sense, we've come to the nation's capital to cash a check. When the architects of our great republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration, they were signing a promissory note to which American was to fall heir. The note was a promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, but they left out natives, would be guaranteed the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. It's obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as citizens of color are concerned. Instead of honoring this sacred obligation, America has given its colored people a bad check, a check that's come back marked insufficient funds. But we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. That's important. Jim Bear will tell you, you're trading in currency that you stole. You talking Bitcoin, we still talking dollars. Follow me, my friends, because I want to do all that. The other thing that was powerful that month, I'm about to turn it back over to Jim Bear, is that they do it in the shadow of Lincoln and the symbolism of Lincoln and the symbolism of emancipation. But the problem is, Lincoln problematic as hell if we're talking about this from the perspective of Native people. Because one man's great emancipator. King says, 5 years ago, five score years ago, a great American whose symbolic we stand against signed the Emancipation Proclamation. This momentous became as a great beacon of hope to millions of slaves who were seared in the flames of withering injustice. The irony is, though, Lincoln didn't move immediately on the Emancipation Proclamation. You know this, he wrote it in September of 1862, put it in the drawer and waited for a Union victory because he was afraid how it would play in the border states if he leave. Now, if you don't know how that looks, just look around America today at all the people that are kind of waiting to see what happens because history doesn't repeat itself, it echoes. King says, 100 years later, the colored American is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation, the change of discrimination. 100 years later, the colored American lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material. 100 years later, the colored American is still languishing in the corner of American society and finds himself in exile on his own land. But the first victims, those of you that went on the Sacred Sites tour, look, because the story we want to tell you is what a difference a day makes. Because just a few days before Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, December 26, 1862, he signed an order sanctioning the execution, the largest mass execution. And I'm turning over to Jim Bear now. Just do the work on this one. We call it the Dakota War, the Dakota conflict. They lied and said that the Dakota were Confederates. People talk about sight. We want to talk about sight today, right? So in an age before pictures, right, when you don't have pictures, but when Darnell and Frazier don't have a cell phone camera to capture what we were saying, right? Well, you've been brutalizing black people. No, we didn't do that. No, I have no idea what you're talking about. Oh, explain this. Well, the official account is that George Floyd had a medical event in which he aspirated and died. Ain't what the cell phone says, but in an age before cameras, when all you can go on is images, this is what they're telling the world. The indigenous are killing white women, and they're part of the Confederacy. Both of them damn lies. Nothing about the broken treaties, nothing about the violence against indigenous. We still got an office of missing and murdered indigenous women and girls in the state of Minnesota because what was wrought before the Civil War, the echoes today. Follow. I'll let Jim Bear pick up there because it is the story of what happens with a gentleman by the name of Robert Hickman. Oh, by the way, if the Indigenous were so bad, then why are them mixed Indigenous people over there? But see, no, I don't have time to tell you the story today. I'm giving you the, look, you got to hear from a man. So I don't have time. You got to read the whole thing. I've been trying to get him to write a book. It ain't working. But maybe you can put some pressure on it with me. Maybe we could do it. If they're so, there's a program on history now, Kevin Costner's The West. One of the stories that we tell in that documentary, I'm in that program, is about all the Indigenous people all the white folks that left white society and went to the Indigenous because it was better. Wait, better, we ain't stealing nothing? There's equity? You mean we're gonna sit at the table and work out our disputes? That's how that's gonna work? You don't show up with guns and be like, follow me, my friends, because I'm gonna turn this over to Jim Bear. I wanna be very clear that something happens at that river that in May of '63, Robert Hickman, 75 slaves from Missouri, escaped. Now I wanna be clear, they're escaping with the sanction of the Emancipation Proclamation not enforced in Missouri because Missouri is a border state. Follow me here? So they got no authority to do this. They're on their own. Keep in mind, they have no, in fact, the reality is they're kind of in Dred Scottville. Because if they run into the wrong people and they're on their way to the north, right? They want to get someplace free. And Hickman and his colleagues, black men and women, end up on a ship raft up the Mississippi River, and they don't have really any guide their vessel. And they run into, in May of 1863, a steamboat called the Northern, which was heading for St. Paul. And they hop on that steamboat. And yet that steamboat's got a history. And I'm letting Jim Bear pick up there.
I told you. Those of you that were on the Sacred Sites tour with me yesterday, I promised you a second chapter of the story. And that second chapter is here. And it just strikes me, I'm using literary terms like chapter when this man for a year now has been hounding me to write a book. Okay, fine. Oh, Miss Roslyn. Miss Roslyn spoken. So if you were with me yesterday, you remember that we were at this place called Bedote, where the waters meet. What we have here is we have an overhead view of Bedote. Coming in from the right here, this is the Minnesota River, and then this is the Mississippi River. This is the confluence. If you weren't with me yesterday, just a quick Cliff's Notes version. This is the center of the Dakota world, center of the universe, place of first creation, not to overstretch theological metaphor, but this is the Garden of Eden for Dakota people. Not even arguably, it is the most sacred land in the Dakota universe. There are scars of colonization on this sacred land. We talked about them yesterday. I don't have a picture of it, but the very first Catholic church in the state of Minnesota sits directly overlooking Bedote. The very first military institution in Minnesota sits directly overlooking Bedote. That is Fort Snelling, right there. The most sacred land in Minnesota. We have the two primary institutions in Minnesota intentionally placing their scar of colonization. What does it say? I'm watching you. I'm watching you. This land that you hold as sacred, it's no longer yours. It's why this work is so important. We're going to get into a deeper narrative of why this work is so important. But this work is so important, and I talked earlier about this work having been done in silos. And don't get me wrong, I'm not, well, okay, I'm kind of criticizing the silos, but I'm not minimizing the work that came out of those silos, right? Because a mantra, a rallying point that came out of the Black civil rights movement is that this country was founded on the backs of slavery. That is a true statement, but it's not a complete statement. And as the American Indian movement gained prominence throughout the late 60s and early 70s, a mantra and rallying cry that came out of that movement was that this nation was founded on the genocide of indigenous people and the theft of indigenous lands. And that is a true statement. But it's not a complete statement. It's only when we combine these mantras and these narratives that we can begin to tell a complete story. This nation was founded on the genocide of indigenous people, the theft of indigenous land, and stolen labor. Unless we're willing to tell that story, we're telling stories, but we're not telling complete stories. I'm tired of hearing good stories, but incomplete stories. As we move down into the Bdote, we go down into the valley. A short walk along the confluence of the rivers will bring you to these trees. Notice these marks on those trees. A lot of people that go down there, they're like, oh, look at the beavers had a field day. No, this is not beavers, okay? I'm a Midwest boy, grew up here. I know what trees look like that beavers have taken. These are not trees that beavers had been gnawing on. Notice this pattern, this indentation in these trees. What these trees are the points along what was known as the steamboat landing that served Fort Snelling. This is where for decades upon decades upon decades, these riverboats that were supplying human cargo and material cargo to Fort Snelling, they would tie off their boats. They would take their ropes and they would tie them to these trees. And over decades upon decades, those ropes wore that pattern, etched that pattern into these trees. These trees still stand there today. You can go, and I've done this many times. I'm a historian who just loves to lay my hands on places. Those of you who were with me yesterday, you know, like, I'm a place-based historian. Like, there's magic that happens when you're actually, can't get from a book, you can't get from a slideshow. There's a magic that happens when you're touching the story itself. Dr. Williams said in 1863, the Northern, the steamboat, the riverboat, the Northern, coming out of St. Louis, heading upriver, happens upon a raft that was occupied by Robert Hickman and 75 escaping slaves. Robert Hickman himself, an enslaved black man, they're escaping to come north. They're on a raft. They're not even on a boat. They fashioned a raft together. Literally, you all know what a raft is. They're literally tying logs together to stay afloat on the water. At some point in their journey, they lose their oars, their means of propulsion. And I don't know if you know about how geography works, but if you're just free on a river, you're not going upriver, you're going to go downriver, okay? So Hickman and his 75 are in a conundrum. Lo and behold, the riverboat Northern happens upon them and sees them and decides that they will tow Hickman and his 75 with their raft. He will tow them along their journey. Now, why do they tow them? Why not just take them on board? The answer might not be what you think. It wasn't because they were black, because the Northern was already filled with black people. The Northern was filled with, some estimates say, 200 enslaved bodies that were brought north to be placed into forced labor at Fort Snelling and places beyond. See, this is where this narrative is so important because, you know, listen, I grew up in Minnesota. I had the luxury of my entire childhood, adolescent, and young adulthood. I had the luxury of believing that the institution of slavery was a problem for all of you in the South. You walk right across the street from here, there is a statue, a memorial, a monument, if you will, of someone, a soldier from the Minnesota First Volunteers, the great liberators. We love, here in Minnesota, oh God, I wish I could spend a month with you. Here in Minnesota, we love to celebrate our Civil War heritage because we were such great liberators. Never mentioning the fact that there was an entire institution of industrialized slavery, of bringing enslaved people up from the South so that they could serve in our fields and at our forts. You know about Dred Scott, the famous, one of the most famous Supreme Court cases in which the ruling said that a black man has no rights that a white man is obligated to honor. Dred Scott litigated for his freedom, and he lost. Dred Scott served as a slave here in Minnesota at Fort Snelling. Can you go back to the trees? And when Dred Scott first set foot in Minnesota, the boat that brought him here right off to one of these trees. Talk about touching history. So the Northern is on its journey here to St. Paul, carrying its human cargo as well as towing along Hickman and his 75 escaping relatives. When they reached St. Paul, originally they stopped just a few miles up Kellogg Boulevard from here at a place called the Lower Landing. It was the port of entry for all of St. Paul River traffic at the time. It was a bustling port. And the plan was that Hickman would be offloaded, he would, you know, set foot, but he was prevented from doing so. A little race riot, if you will, ensued as soon as the people of St. Paul saw these 75 freedom seekers. What was the context around this race riot? Well, the Irish had a lot of opinions about letting this many black people in St. Paul at one time. Because here's the funny thing about whiteness. In 1863, the Irish were almost white, but not quite. And don't get me wrong, don't confuse what I'm saying, because I know that in this new era of racial justice, an argument often comes up. Well, the Irish people, they were slaves too. Fuck, you were. You weren't. Okay? You weren't. Well, the Irish people were the black people their time. No, you weren't. Okay? Whiteness is fluid. Whiteness is constructed, but whiteness is a social reality that we all have to deal with. And the Irish were desperately trying to gain entrance into whiteness. And if gaining whiteness meant that you assume a threat by a social class that is 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps lower than you, if you can gain another step forward in whiteness, then guess what? We, the Irish, I say we, I'm not Irish. We, the Irish, we're going to organize, we're going to gather, and we're going to keep these black people from coming into St. Paul. So Hickman is not allowed entering into St. Paul. So Northern continues on its journey upriver to Fort Snelling. It's a distance of, no, it's less than 7 miles. Continues on its journey upriver to Fort Snelling, where it offloads Hickman and his 75 freedom seekers. And Hickman and those 75, for the first time in their lives, perhaps, set foot on free soil at Minnesota, the sacred land in Minnesota. Okay? A few miles from here stands Pilgrim Baptist Church. It is in the heart of the Rondo neighborhood, or what is left of the Rondo neighborhood. Robert Hickman founded Pilgrim Baptist Church. Pilgrim Baptist Church is the second Baptist church, or excuse me, second black church in Minnesota. Okay? And it is second by like weeks, if not months. So we have two historic black churches in Minnesota that pop up almost at the same time. So if I weren't being honest, I'd say the first black church in Minnesota was started by Robert Hickman, but it technically was the second by a matter of weeks, okay? Pilgrim Baptist Church is an epicenter for black community in the Rondo neighborhood. It's an epicenter for black community in Minnesota, founded by Robert Hickman. Now, earlier I mentioned that word intersectionality and how it is problematic. Usually don't use the word intersectionality because I don't think we have a sense and a grasp of. I don't think a lot of us who use that word intersectionality actually have the commitment to live into intersectionality in the way that it is needed. But in this instance, in this narrative, there is no better term to use than the word intersection. Because as I told you, that northern, and then subsequently there was a second boat called the Davenport. They were on their way to St. Paul, yes, to deliver some slave labor. But those of you who were with me yesterday, you remember how Bdote holds the stories of Genesis and genocide. The genesis of the Dakota people as well as the genocide of the Dakota people, because right there in that river valley at the confluence of the rivers that we just saw in that picture, right there in the winter of 1862 and into 1863 stood the site of one of history's early concentration camps, in which for that period of 5 months, from November of 1862 to early May of 1863, 1,700 Dakota elders, women, and children were held as prisoners in this concentration camp. 3 to 4 of them every single day died of disease and hunger. Over 300 Dakota dead in the span of one winter. Now, early in 1863, a piece of legislation is brought forth and is passed and is commonly referred to as the Dakota Removal Act. The language of the bill calls for the forever banishment and/or extermination of all Dakota people from the borders of Minnesota. And that is the actual language of the bill. Forever banishment and/or extermination. This is passed into law early in 1863, and what that means is that now Dakota people can no longer draw breath in Minnesota. It's not enough that they can no longer live in freedom. Now they can't breathe. What does that sound like? What does that sound like? Because the Dakota people can no longer continue to draw breath in the state of Minnesota, a system of sanctioned bounties was placed on the heads of Dakota people. Started at $50 and eventually rose to $200. And just for context, $200 would have bought you 35 acres of Minnesota land in 1863. Now, what do we do with all these prisoners sitting at Bedote? Legally, they can't be here anymore. That's what the Northern was for. That's what the other riverboat, the Davenport, was for. The Northern and the Davenport tie off to those trees that you just saw over May 4th and May 5th of 1863. The Dakota survivors are loaded onto those riverboats and they are sent down the Mississippi River to St. Louis, where they catch the Missouri River. They then head up the Missouri River into the middle of South Dakota, and they're offloaded as prisoners of war at a place called Crow Creek, 335 miles west of here, in the middle of South Dakota. Here's the thing, intersectionality. The very day that Hickman and the founders of the Rondo community, the very day that they make landfall, that they set foot in free land here in St. Paul, the very day the Dakota survivors are loaded onto those ships to be exiled out of the state of Minnesota. Two communities, two histories, occupying the same spot at the same moment, but moving in two different directions. As the sun is rising on Black community in Minnesota, the sun is setting on Indigenous community in Minnesota. Intersections, crossroads, confluence. This is why this work is so incredibly important. How foolish of us to think that my narrative, the history of my struggles and my family's struggles, people's struggles, how foolish of me to think that that is in any way independent from your community, your history, your struggles. They literally occupied the same spot at the same time. Moving two different directions. My own personal story. I'm about this much Black. One of my Black friends described it to me. He says, "You're just Black enough to get yourself in a whole lot of trouble." About the early 1830s, an escaping slave coming up south, a woman named Abi, happens across a raggedy group of Indians in the middle of Wisconsin. Now, here's the thing. We should all know this, that in the early 1800s, escaping slaves, it was not enough to get north of the Mason Dixon. It was not enough to get into a free state. You had to go all the way to Canada to be safe. That's what the Underground Railroad actually functioned as a means to bring people into free Canada, in which case you were then free from United States laws, things like the Fugitive Slave Act. And that is 100% true, is a true story, but it's not a complete story. Because there were also little pockets of refuge for escaping slaves between the Mason-Dixon line and Canada. Those pockets were called Indian reservations. Whereas a unique condition of our sovereignty means that so many U.S. laws don't actually apply and are not enforceable within the boundaries of that sovereign nation. And Abi found herself community with this group of themselves struggling Mohican Indians. She marries into the family. Generations and generations later, Jim Bear Jacobs stands before you in a nice suit, looking all dapper and handsome. That's why this work is so important. Because it is no longer sufficient that I should battle and fight against white supremacy siloed in my own community. Because, no mistake, white supremacy treated both of our communities very differently. For decades, those who have come before us have looked at those differences, and we've played the oppression Olympics. Well, you only had your land stolen. They whipped our bodies. Or, you at least to live. Sure, you were slaves, but they let you live. Who does that serve? White supremacy is asininely inconsistent, except in one thing: it will always serve itself. So, there have been, and in some cases still continue to be, laws that govern our blood. I don't even mean blood in a metaphorical sense. I mean literally our blood. You all heard of the one-drop rules? Yeah. One-drop rules means that no matter how light your pigment gets, if you have an Abi, Grandma Abi in your past, you're black. At the very same time one-drop rules were in effect in this country, at the very same time within Indian country, there was a thing called blood quantum, in which the government officially kept track of the amount of indigenous blood we had, because if we can get it below a threshold, then we don't have to call them Indian anymore. If we don't have to call them Indian anymore, they're not sovereign. They're not sovereign. What happens to their land? We get it. Almost at the same time in history, when there were laws in place to prevent Dr. Williams' ancestors from actually receiving any kind of education, almost at the same time, and we're talking within a matter of a decade and a half or so, at the same time, it is illegal to educate black people in this nation. It is mandated that Indian children get educated, so much so that they come in, they steal our children, ship them hundreds, sometimes thousands of miles away to break the family ties, to break the sense of community. At the same time, it's illegal to educate one man. It is dictated and mandated that you educate someone else. Why? White supremacy is asininely inconsistent, except in one thing: it will always serve white supremacy. What was the value of black folk? Your body, your labor. And as long as we can continue to keep black folk from being white, we don't got to feel guilty about utilizing their labor. We already know scientifically they're not human. It's just a beast of burden that walks on two legs instead of four. As long as we can keep them from being white, we can take their bodies all day long. Because the value of the black people was their bodies. What was the value of Native people? Land, or resource. See, early in this little colonial experiment, they tried to enslave indigenous people. They tried. Guess what happened? You can't enslave indigenous people when we know the woods, the mountains, and the rivers better than you ever will. So they did ship us overseas to serve in slave markets overseas. When you come looking, the value to white supremacy and black people was their bodies. The value of indigenous people to white supremacy was the land. And the sooner we can get indigenous people to not be indigenous, but we can invite them in to whiteness, not even invite them, we can force them into whiteness, we can have their land. We can have their resources. And when all we look at is the physical effects on our bodies and our ancestors' bodies, we will play oppression Olympics all fucking day. But all it takes is to go one step below, one step beneath. Why did they treat your ancestors like that? Why did they treat your ancestors differently than they treated my ancestors? Because it serves white supremacy. I will always, until my dying breath, diligently fight for indigenous justice. And I will always, until my dying breath, fight for black liberation and black justice. Not because it makes me feel good, not even because it's the right thing to do and I get some moral platitudes from it, but because for so much of this history of struggle, for so much, if you dive one step below the surface narrative that you have been told, if you dive one step, we are literally occupying the same space at the same time. Intersections, crossroads, confluence. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Williams. Yeah.
So I think a little over time, I'm going to run quickly with you here. I just want to, answer a question that Jim Bear raised for you. Why don't they take Hickman and others on? Not because they're black, because they're contraband. Now, why is that language important? Because even today, we treat people who are illegal as contraband as if they're not human beings. Like it's an irony of Dred Scott that it began with this fundamental assumption about the humanity of the Scots, right? And that slavery was a legal system that allowed you to deny the very humanness of the people that you were trying to other. So that word contraband is important. Now, if I'm Captain the Northern, you know what my excuse is going to be? If we bring those contraband on, we're breaking the law. We would be the fugitive slave law. We'd be breaking the law. In the same way today, if some immigrant student is at my school and ICE comes, see, don't play with me. Because the reality is those echoes are real, but people don't want to talk about them. They don't want to see the parallels, but the parallels exist because that's the same system we've been operating on. It's what makes people uncomfortable when they say things like, and I don't believe in this, defund the police. Never thought that. But I do say reimagine public safety because policing is built on racist foundations that center on what I shared with you earlier. So if you'd want to break it, you'd have to destroy the system and rebuild it from the bottom up that doesn't begin with, and we police people of color. Derek Chauvin's knee maneuver, and people said that's the chokehold from Daryl Gates and the LAPD in the 1970s, right? That goes back to the way they took down indigenous and black people at the turn of the century. Now, I got receipts, as the young people say, but we don't have time, as the old people say. I want to say this to you very quickly. When we talk about sitting at the table, right? It's very important to note that earlier you heard about the blueprint. You asked the question, what is the blueprint for justice? Herb Block, great cartoonist. And in fact, I want to go back and capture this very quickly. I use some of these political cartoons from Thomas Nast for a reason, because they're deeply anti-Irish, right? They portray the Irish as half apes. But that's the reality, is that Jim Bear was talking about at work, like people like Noel Ignatieff, how the Irish became white. Before they became white, they were othered too, right? And so what does that mean when you get othered? And instead of creating cultural sensitivity, often in America, what it does is create exclusivity. We're looking to define a talented tenth. How am I different than you, right? How do I fight for the shared basic humanity of us all? Just really hard work. That's harder work. This image here, Thomas Nast, when he talked about the subjugation of Black people, put an Irish person there at the 5 points, the New York City draft riots. And he was trying to say something I think is very important. You Northerners, you're indicted too. It's ironic that all that crap happened on a ship called the Northern, because Northerners love the narrative that we weren't party to this. We're good up here in our Northern communities. Follow me, because Jim Bear talked about education. I'm going to tell you something about Robert Hickman that's going to make you uncomfortable, and I'm going to whisper it because it's that. Black people may not have been able to get a formal education, but white supremacy made sure they took away the most important, that pilgrims get to be colonizers. How could you say that, Dr. Williams? That's so cruel. If I call myself a pilgrim, that means that when I arrive, the pilgrims took native people's land, right? And so you invited me into a system where you've now put me in a position to reify your white supremacist colonial history, adopting language, pilgrim, pioneer, which by definition, do you follow where I'm going here? Pilgrim Baptist? Pilgrim? I'm gonna get in trouble. A couple of years ago, they were talking about sports teams, and they were like the Cleveland Indians, and people were up in arms about the Cleveland Indians, right? And they should change the name, right? Well, fine, but we should also think very intensely about the language that gets used in spaces that speak to the confluence that Jim Bear talked about, that we just kind of gloss over, right? And it's like when the Challenger went down, and Ronald Reagan in that beautiful speech said they were pioneers, right? Very problematic language. Now that Elon is colonizing space, and guess who's going to be left out? Because that's what Gil Scott Heron wrote in 1969. What's the moon? A rat that bit my sister Nell with Whitey on the moon. Her face and arms began to swell, but Whitey's on the moon. How come ain't no money here? Because Whitey's on the moon. Taxes take my whole damn check. The junkies make me a nervous wreck. The price of food is going up. And if all that wasn't enough, a rat that bit my sister Nell. And what was Gil Scott Heron's point? You may know oppression, but you don't know it until you have a medical incident. You don't have coverage, and then it all falls apart. See, history don't repeat itself. It echoes. As they take away people's Social Security because they're so upset about Obamacare, which created a floor, not a ceiling. See, I got receipts, but we don't have time. The young people say we got receipts. Old people don't have time. We over time. Let me conclude. I want to share this with you because if you're not careful, dreams become famous first, and they become nightmares. Robert Hickman and those 75 Black folks that came ashore, that was a moment of opportunity. And yet in that moment, they couldn't see. Now people say, well, how could they have fought? I'm not judging them, I'm talking about us. Because we can see. In fact, Lorraine Hansberry writes about this in The Raisin in the Sun, but she doesn't really write about it directly. She writes about it through Walter. I'm sorry. Let me not do Raisin in the Sun yet. Actually, I'll do Raisin in the Sun. She does it with Beneatha's love interest, who says to her, "Isn't there something wrong in the world where all dreams depend on the death of a man?" And what he was talking about is that the father had died, and they were trying to figure out what to do with the money. And Walter Lee Younger said, "We should buy a house. That's the American dream." And Benitha was like, "You should use the money so I can go to medical school and go to the continent to use that medical degree in the service of my people." No, hold on. They're fighting over dreams that are mired in tragedies. But I want to do Invisible Man, Ralph Ellison, 1950, this language. I am visible, understand. I am invisible, understand, simply because people refuse to see me. It's like the bodiless head you see at circus sideshows that are distorted by a hard distorting glass. When they see me, they see only their surroundings, themselves, or figments of their imagination. Indeed, everything and anything but me. So I've learned to be careful so as not to awaken. There's nothing more dangerous than awaking a sleepwalker. But the reality is, we now have to wake up the sleepwalkers, because sleepwalking is dreaming and assuming those dreams. Look, maybe I'm being too figurative. Let me be clear. This is a moment where we need to lean in and do the work, because sleeping and dreaming in this moment means that we might miss seeing and recognizing that if we don't do the work of going deep and connecting the dots Jim Barrow talks about, we find ourselves at the March on Washington in 1963, where Anna Arnold Hedgeman and Pauli Murray have to say to Dr. King and A. Philip Randolph, how come no one on this program? And then you need a women's movement years later, and you have Black women within that movement going, how come you white women and we have different issues? Because your issues look different than my issues, right? But you want primacy for your issues. You want primacy for what you feel, instead of thinking about how we reimagine a system in ways that could empower us all. Now that's truly revolutionary, but that ain't about dreaming. That's about visioning. What's the difference, Dr. Williams? I mean, that's semantics. You gave us another semantic. Well, I'm going to be very clear with you. When I say history doesn't repeat itself, it echoes. That's the Minneapolis Tribune from 1912. They knew what time it was. I could do another one with you here, but when you talk about dreams, the first, right? This image of Dwight David Eisenhower with the nation over civil unrest. And then you've got that same image of Donald Trump as the fire chief, right? Fanning the flames of hatred and anger. We think about it in this way. This really disturbing political cartoon from 1913 that shows the United States putting a wall on the Mexican border and erecting tariffs against Canada. You can't make it up, because these are echoes. And the problem is, people don't want to deal with the echoes. They want to go back and draft again and go over the same material again and act like they created something new and go, didn't we do a good job? Doesn't that feel good? Look at the big tent we built. We came up with BIPOC, Black, Indigenous people, and people like, well, damn it, you didn't really deal with any of the issues. You built such a big tent that you couldn't understand that there are Hmong in this community where when Suni Lee won the gold medal, people got their feelings hurt because Suni Lee came out and said, I'm a Hmong American and none of y'all know why I'm here. I'm okay to win a medal for you, but you don't want to know anything about my history, right? And you want to pretend that we didn't contribute, right? And now all of a sudden I'm an American because I won you a gold medal. Muhammad Ali threw his medal away for that. Changed his name from Cassius to Muhammad. And that made people away. And then when he died, they turned him to a secular saint, right? They said, well, Ali, what he did was noble. Wasn't noble when he did it, he wouldn't have taken his boxing license. The reality is we have to be willing to give something up, including a seat at the table. In fact, we have to imagine a world where the table doesn't exist, because the table is a limitation, is created and crafted out of the soil of inequality. My friends, when I said what the American public always wants is a tragedy with a happy ending, I'll tell you that my friend Jim Bear, he said I was going to put him in, likes to say whiteness to be innocent. That makes people uncomfortable. But guess what? I like to be innocent too. We all need to be indicted in this work, because the minute that I'm happy to be a pilgrim, let me conclude with you on this note, my friends. I'm going to go back to this slide here. Actually, I'm going to go forward and end on this one. Chief Joseph, 1879, gave a speech in which he said something that I think speaks to our contemporary moment. I'm just going to read it to you. I'm not going to say anything after that. You won't hear anything after this other than me put this mic down. But Chief Joseph in 1879 is speaking about what's wrong, and he's going to name the problem in a way that's inescapable. And it indicts us. What does Chief Joseph say? I've heard talk and talk, but nothing is, help me. Good words do not last long unless they amount to. Words do not pay for my dead. They do not pay for my country now, overrun by. Good words will not get my people where they can live in and take care of themselves. I'm tired of talk that comes to nothing. It makes my heart sick when I remember all the broken promises. If the white man wants to live in peace with the Indian, Black people, with LGBTQ+, with BIPOC, whatever stupid language you want to put up, but the bottom line is that what we're talking about is if we want to live in harmony and in community and in humanity, if we want the beloved community that King talked about it, this is the sacrifice. No good words, good works. Follow me. Last part, I said I wasn't going to embellish. If there need be no trouble, treat all men alike, give the same law, give them all an even chance to live and grow. All men will be made the same great spirit chief. They are all brothers. You know, in the movie, they turn that into Tonto, giving some wise, sage advice like the Black woman in every movie. Right? Oh, baby, you so wise, and you're a second-class citizen. If we're going to embrace it, it has to mean something. There can't be any second-class citizens. We got to hold that mirror up, and we have to see. We can't afford to live in a society anymore where people can't breathe, and we're just happy because it's our moment in the sun. Our Fort Snelling moment can't come at the expense of somebody else not being able to breathe. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Powerful. Are you glad to be in St. Paul today? So, a couple of quick announcements. Just deep gratitude for both of you for today, for yesterday, and for what's to come. Thank you. We're going to have lunch now, and lunch is that away. And on your way down the halls to get to lunch, you will pass a sign that says theater. That's where we'll be meeting at 1:15 to watch the film, okay? So on the way back, don't come all the way back here. However, next door is, if you'll remember, we're going to be recording testimonials, what it's like to be here, what coming to the table means to you, in a sentence or two. We don't want the people like me who will talk for 10 minutes about what a great time I'm having here. And that we have, I don't remember who it is, but we have a volunteer from our team. Maybe it's Julie, maybe it's Jody. Thank you. Who will be helping in the room next door. So before you go to lunch or in the middle of it or after, we'd like to get a wide variety that we'll be able to use to inspire people about this work moving forward. Okay, so that's going to be in the room next door. And then we'll be reconvening in the theater. Am I forgetting anything, Giovanni? 1:15 in the theater? Right. If we can get, 5 or 10 people who will go here first before going to lunch, that would be great. And then if there's some that, you'll eat fast and come back in 45 minutes or whatever. But we want to get a variety of people talking about the work. Okay? Yeah. Okay, 3 minutes to set up the camera, but you can go in and talk with each other about what's next. Okay? Thank you, everyone. Thanks again, gentlemen. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, y'all. See you in a little while. Great. Hey, Marion. What's up? Yes, I'm Giovanni Washington. Why are people calling my names? You said Giovanni Washington? I'm gonna shut this down, y'all. We'll see you back at, I'm not gonna turn it back on until 2:45. You guys go watch the film on your own. Okay, bye.